Hello and welcome. My name is Dr. Rizwan Qureshi, and I'm a very fortunate consultant in emergency medicine to be working here in Sydney, Australia, and enjoying a good work-life balance. However, what if I told you there are many doctors who do not have this option, even though they might be working in Australia, they might be working in other states or in Sydney on a far less salary, and if they're needing to increase the salary, they may have to move towards the regional or rural areas. Today, we are diving deep into an important topic: doctors' salaries across Australia. Why do they vary so much between the states and between urban, regional, and rural settings? Let me divide this video into the segments of who pays the doctor, how's the salaries of the hospital doctors, that is both the junior doctors as well as the senior doctors or specialists, the salaries of the GPs, why don't doctors just relocate if there's so much discrepancy in the salary, and what does it mean in terms of cost of living in different states or for that urban, regional or rural setting. And finally, I'll let all the conclusions for you to make up your own mind. Who pays doctors? In Australia, doctors are actually employed by the state governments, not the federal government. The federal government funds Medicare, public hospital, and immigration and registration process for the doctors. The state governments manage public hospital, hire doctors directly, and negotiate the salary contract known as enterprise bargaining agreements or EBAs. Each state negotiates independently, leading to major differences in how much doctors earn. This was one of the driving reasons for the recent industrial action or strikes in New South Wales, where doctors protested about their low wages, and after having been discriminated for a decade long of poor salary suppression, despite the cost of living in Sydney rising compared to any other city in Australia. What about the salaries of the specialists? Let's take a look at the average total earnings of the senior medical officers, including the penalties and after-hour works. So if you look at the salary of the consultant, New South Wales would pay anything between $280 to up to $340,000, Victoria between $290 to $355, Queensland about $250 to $420. You can see how that has actually jumped now. Western Australia going up to all the way to $430, South Australia going up to $360, and Tasmania would include up to $330. Northern Territory again jumping up to $460,000. And if you look at this table, you can see that Northern Territory, Western Australia, and Queensland offer higher total package to attract doctors more towards their own state. And obviously, if you go on to more remote areas and underserved areas in these particular states, you're paid much more on top of these base salary. Now, meanwhile, in New South Wales, specialists often earn significantly less, despite Sydney having one of the highest living costs in Australia. Now, what about the junior doctor salaries? Now, these include as interns, RMOs, registrar. They are the workhorse of the entire hospital. Now, including the penalty shifts and on-call allowances and some of the overnight allowances, let's look at their salary. Looking at this table, it is very clear that for the intern, the salary again are better in Western Australia, Queensland, even in Victoria compared to New South Wales. Looking at the registrar year 1, you can see the salaries vary significantly, and it could be as low as $135,000 and could increase all the way up to $155,000. And again, Western Australia, Queensland, and Northern Territory pay their registrars much better compared to New South Wales. Same goes for the registrar year 3 or more senior registrar, in which the salaries can jump up to $190,000 for states like Western Australia and Queensland. So as you can see, Queensland and Western Australia and Northern Territory generally lead in pay. New South Wales remains at the bottom and below the national median, which has led to, as I said, dissatisfaction amongst the junior doctors there. What about the GP salaries? Compare that with the urban or regional or rural location. Now, general practitioners are paid entirely differently because they often work as independent contractors under Medicare billing structure. Average earnings based on their location are, for example, an annual income in urban areas for a GP in Sydney or Melbourne would be between $220,000 to $270,000. Outer metro or regional areas, this may jump up to $350,000. And if you really want to go out into the rural or remote areas, that may fetch you up to $500,000, and I've seen an Edward up to $700,000 and $1 million annually as well. Now, in rural and remote settings, incentives such as higher Medicare rebates, bulk billing, bonuses, relocation allowances, Hospital locum work opportunities for GPs can also help significantly increase the salary. Similarly, emergency medicine specialists doing rural or regional locum work can earn anything between $3,500 to up to $7,000 per week. Now, these doctors could be fully qualified emergency physician, or they could be very senior emergency physician who have got general registration. Now, what about private practice opportunities? Are they more abundant in remote areas or less in the urban areas? Now, there is a bit of trend that the urban areas like metropolitan Sydney, metropolitan Brisbane, they are getting more saturated when it comes to the private work, because they are occupied by the more established, more seasoned surgeons, medical specialists. So there might be a better opportunity, I won't say in the remote, but the regional area. And I've seen plenty of my friends who were surgeons and they were able to develop a very good practice in Western Sydney when that was in the developing or booming zone. Also, people have been able to develop a good practice in Wollongong and Illawarra region, the ophthalmologists, the orthopedic surgeons, the plastic surgeons, because they don't want to, waste time in a very saturated market here in the city. So regions are not entirely all that bad. Not that only they offer a good salary, but you're able to develop a better private pay structure. Some of the cosmetic doctors, some of the radiology practices have been able to thrive excellent incomes in the regional setting. What would it all mean when it comes to the cost of living? What is the financial reality of all of that? Now, higher salaries do not automatically mean better lifestyle, but in Australia, it is actually exactly true. If you're paid higher, that means that you are paid in Western Australia and you are paid well in Queensland or Northern Territory, where the cost of living is much affordable. In fact, I would say dirt cheap compared to Sydney and Melbourne. So let's factor the cost of living. If you look at the state, the average house price in New South Wales is over $1.2 million and rent is about $3,200 per month. In Victoria, it's about $900,000 and the rent is about $2,900. Queensland, significant drift now, $750,000 for an average house price with a rent of $2.5 grand per month. Western Australia, $720,000 for an average house, $2,300 for a monthly rent. South Australia, $700,000 for a house, a good house, and a rent up to $2,200. Tasmania, $680,000 for a house and $2,000 for rent. Northern Territory. Now this is just amazing. This is one of the best paying state in entire Australia. The average house price for a 3-bedroom or 4-bedroom house vary between $520,000 to up to $600,000 with a good acreage and front yard and backyard, with the average rent to up to $1,800 only. And that's why I've seen recently lots of GPs coming in from overseas migrating to Northern Territory. So you can see all these changes, that despite being paid poorly, the cost of living in New South Wales is significantly higher compared to that in Northern Territory, where you paid very well and the cost of living is low. Do doctors just relocate for better pay? I think there's an evidence that doctors are willing to relocate, but not always. Now, that might come to you as a surprise, but there was actually a survey in 2023 done by Australian Medical Association that 52% of the junior doctors considered relocating for better pay or better lifestyle for that matter. 28% were actively applying to interstate or rural jobs. However, the barriers do exist, and they include, children's schooling, limited private or high quality schools in rural areas. There's also lack of childcare available in the regional and rural areas. There is a cultural isolation that is especially true for IMGs. What about the transport? Transport is actually seriously limited in terms of there would be no major airports, there would be no public transport in the regional and rural areas. What about partner's career? This is one of the most significantly important factors, that you may have a wife or husband who's a non-medical and they may not have any scope of work if you go to the regional and rural areas. There might be far less opportunity to practice in their own industries of IT or mechanical or electrical engineering or whatever the industry might be, teaching even, compared to that in the urban or metropolitan area. It may surprise you, but making a relocation financially a difficult decision is also a mortgage. Now, doctors may have actually taken a significant burden to finally service a mortgage to buy a house in Sydney or Melbourne, and then moving out to the regional area, it just does not make sense because they have now financially invests their future, their family's future into a major city. They may have their relatives there, they may have their friends there. As I said, there's deep cultural belonging to the city, and relocating, it just does not make sense. So while salary matters and it might be lower, these personal and lifestyle factors often outweigh the pure financial consideration. What should the new doctors and migrant doctors should consider? I think for new graduates and migrant doctors, the reality is a bit more nuanced. The migrant general practitioners are mandated to work in modified Monash 3 or MM3 areas, which is far regional and rural locations or even remote Australia. Junior doctors also have limited choices due to matching system of their internships. Registrar may also need to move to the regional areas to secure a competitive training post, for example, in surgery or radiology or anesthesia. And for them, it's a no-brainer. They want to train, they don't want to waste time, and they just want to move and get it done and over with. Ultimately, while rural and remote settings offer higher pay and faster career progression in some cases, lifestyle trade-offs such as children's schooling, partner employment, and opportunities, transport access, and social isolation must all be considered very carefully. Every doctor decision is deeply personal, and in fact, it depends upon the family dynamics. Queensland, Western Australia, and Northern Territory offer the highest overall earning potential, both for GPs and hospital doctors. Rural areas offer higher earnings but also bring lifestyle changes. Where to work is a major decision. It requires balancing salaries, career goals, and family needs, and quality of life as well. If you find this video useful, please do subscribe to my channel. Hope to catch you in the next video. Take a good care of yourself and each other. Goodbye.